In the night on August 17th, 2017, some men crept into an apartment in Constantia, Cape Town. They slipped into the master bedroom, where a man slept beside his partner and 2-year-old child. Without mercy, they shot him dead. This wasn't just any man. It was Brian Weinstein, who was known across continents as the Steroid King. His death became the talk of the town, and both criminal circles and law enforcement agencies were determined to expose the culprits behind the. For 3 years, the case seemed destined to go cold. Then, in December 2020, police made a breakthrough that shook Cape Town's underworld. They arrested 3 men: businessman Mark Liffman, Jerome Donkey Boyson, and William Red Stevens, a feared general in the 27s gang. Along with 13 others, including alleged gang hitmen, they were charged with orchestrating Weinstein's. All 3 appeared in the Cape Town Magistrates Court and were released on 100,000 rands bail. That's about $5,000. But the story didn't end there. It was just the beginning of aftermath. Someone wanted to tie up loose ends, or maybe they wanted justice, but no one knows for sure. 6 days later, Boyson went to a funeral in Durbanville and was ambushed. Luckily, he escaped without getting hurt. He survived, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. William Red Stevens was next on the list. The veteran gangster who had weathered decades in Cape Town's ruthless underworld never saw this as something to have sleepless nights over. He had faced threats before and lived to tell the tale. But this time, he was wrong. This was far more than he ever imagined, and he never saw it coming. Stevens' journey into the criminal world started in prison, where he first joined the 26S, one of South Africa's infamous number gangs. These gangs, the 26S, 27S, and 28S, originated in the prison system and have grown into a powerful force in Cape Town's underworld. They've been around for over 100 years, and their military-style hierarchies still guide their operations today. However, Stevens' violent nature quickly caught the attention of the 27's gang, who saw potential in him. As time went on, he soon switched allegiance to the 27S. One 27's member described it bluntly: in prison, Red took and his way into the 27S, abandoning the 26S. Now, he was schooled in both the 26's and 27's foundations. By the time he was released, Stevens had climbed the ranks to the highest position, general. With that power, he took control of the 27S street operations in Cape Town. On the streets, Stevens didn't just settle for the usual gang work. He recognized the 27s could make serious money if they adapted. Instead of sticking to their old role as enforcers, he restructured the gang, offering protection and even assassins to the highest bidder. Red saw the opportunity others missed. This was a strategy more often seen with the 26s and 28S, but Stevens made it his own. While his plan was lucrative, not all 27's members were on board with his new approach. But Stevens wasn't worried. He had already carved out a new path for the gang and for himself. Across town, 2 other men were locked in a silent war. Mark Liffman carried himself like a businessman, but beneath that polished exterior, his empire was built on something far less respectable. Real estate has long been a common avenue for criminals looking to launder illicit funds. By acquiring properties and businesses, underworld figures could mask the origins of their money. In Liffman's case, while there's no explicit evidence of every deal being linked to criminality, it's widely assumed that his investments were used to wash large sums of money. Then there was Brian Weinstein, the steroid king. Weinstein operated a lucrative steroid distribution network across South Africa. His business model relied on importing raw materials from countries like Turkey, Greece, and China, which were then processed into anabolic steroids in secret labs within South Africa. This operation made him a significant player in the underground world of illegal steroids, and it's well documented that he was earning massive profits of up to 600,000 rand, which is about $32,000 a month. Liffman, much like Weinstein, turned to real estate to wash his money. He was known for building an empire that combined both legitimate and illegitimate enterprises, and property investments were a key element in his efforts to launder the millions he made from organized crime activities. These 2 empires had one goal, and that was to dominate Cape Town's property market, using it as a front to clean the profits from their underworld dealings. As their empires grew, it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed. The same properties, the same ambitions, and the same relentless hunger for power drove them head to head. In a world like theirs, It was never a question of if things would get violent. It was always a question of when. And in Cape Town's underworld, conflicts weren't settled with deals or words, they were settled with. When the inevitable clash came, it was Mark Liffman who was ready to strike first, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. So, he made the call to William "Red" Stevens. The phone call between Liffman and Red was brief. No pleasantries, no details needed, just a name and a number with 6 figures. In that moment, as the line went, Brian Weinstein's fate was sealed. Though he was still walking the streets, blissfully unaware that the king of assassins had just accepted a contract to put his life to an end. The steroid empire Weinstein had built, the weekly shipments from across the seas, the hundreds of thousands in profit, none of it would matter once Red Stevens set his machinery in motion. Taking out Brian Weinstein was no small feat. The man had built a fortress around himself, and his heavy security was so tight that it seemed impenetrable. High walls, electric fences, surveillance cameras, and a small army of guards patrolled his sprawling estate in Constantia, one of Cape Town's wealthiest suburbs. Weinstein slept soundly at night, convinced he was untouchable. But Red Stevens knew better. He knew that the strongest fortresses often crumbled from within. Weinstein's head of security, a man named Matthew, was the key. For 10,000 rand, about $500 a month, Matthew stood watch over the estate, his eyes scanning for threats, his hands steady on the controls of Weinstein's elaborate security system. But while his employer slept, Matthew's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't just counting the hours on his shift. He was counting the zeros in the fortune that lay just beyond his reach. Every day, he studied the operation, memorized its routines, and calculated its worth. And with each passing night, his loyalty to Weinstein grew thinner, replaced by something far more dangerous: greed. Meanwhile, William "Red" Stevens was already putting his plan into motion. A job like this demanded precision, and Red wasn't one to leave anything to chance. He needed men who were ruthless, efficient, and utterly devoid of conscience. Scrolling through his phone, he stopped at 2 names, Cheslin Adams and Fabian Cupido. These weren't just hitmen. They were his best. These were soldiers of the 27's gang who had never failed to deliver. The meeting took place in the dimly lit VIP section of a Cape Town nightclub. Red sat at the center of the table. Around him were Cheslin and Fabian, their faces hard, their eyes cold. These were men who lived by the their reputations built on violence and results. But then another person soon joined them, and that was Matthew. The man Weinstein trusted with his life now sat among those plotting his. Matthew provided everything: the layout of the estate, the timing of the patrols, and the blind spots in the security system. He would leave the back door unlocked, the alarms disabled, the electric fence powerless. When the time came, the wolves wouldn't need to break in. The shepherd himself would lead them inside. As the meeting wrapped up, Stevens knew this was a done deal. Weinstein's empire, his fortress, his life, all of it would crumble in a single night. And when it was over, Stevens would once again prove why he was the most feared man in Cape Town. The night of August 17th, 2017, was when came quietly to Brian Weinstein's door. Inside his luxurious Constantia home, the steroid king lay asleep with his wife and child, unaware that these would be his final moments. The assassins moved like shadows, slipping through the carefully unlocked back door. They went straight to Weinstein's bedroom. The door creaked faintly as they pushed it open, but the sound wasn't enough to wake him. In the dim light, they saw him lying there, vulnerable and unaware. Without hesitation, they 5 times. Weinstein's wife and child woke to the sound, but by then it was too late. They could only watch in horror as the life drained from the man who was both husband and father. The assassins didn't touch them. Their job was done. For Red Stevens' men, it was just another contract fulfilled. The steroid king was and his empire was left in ruins. Mark Liffman sent Red 250,000 rand, roughly $13,000 as they had agreed. For a moment, everything seemed like business as usual. But what Red didn't realize was that the violence of that night had set off a chain of events that would eventually bring his own empire to the ground. The South African anti-gang unit swooped in on the case like hawks circling their prey. It didn't take long for them to catch one of the man, abandoned by the brothers he once trusted, was left with a choice: stay loyal and rot in prison, or betray the gang and save himself. He chose betrayal. The dominoes began to fall. One by one, the names came out: Mark Liffman, Boyson, and finally, William "Red" Stevens himself. They were arrested and their mugshots flashed across the news. Though they posted bail of 100,000 rands, roughly $5,500, to buy them temporary freedom, the damage was already done. The foundation of their criminal empire had cracked, and the walls were beginning to crumble. On the streets, whispers spread like the 27's gang, once a brotherhood bound by tradition and honor, was now divided. Many of its members were angry, particularly those who had never aligned with Red's vision. They had warned him about straying from the old ways, about turning their brotherhood into a business. Now, their worst fears had come true. The gang was fractured, its reputation tarnished, and the man who had once been their leader was now a target. Red Stevens had built his empire on fear and precision, but even the most powerful kings must answer for their sins. On the evening of February 2nd, 2021, William "Red" Stevens was outside his residence on Rembrandt Street in Scottsville, Krypfenstein. A man who had sent others to their graves too many times to count now stood at the edge of his own fate, though he didn't know it yet. At approximately 6:35 p.m., 3 assailants approached, and before Stevens could react, the first rang out. Then another. Then a hailstorm of The king of assassins collapsed onto the pavement and succumbed to his injuries at the scene. Witnesses reported that the men fled in a blue Hyundai. The news of his spread like wild. Retaliation came swiftly and without mercy. Rang out across the townships as rival gangs clashed in the darkness. Video clips of the chaos flooded social media. Politicians scrambled for control. Albert Fritz, the Minister of Community Safety, called for calm, but words held no weight in a world where spoke louder. Stevens wasn't an isolated incident. He was the latest in a long line of fallen warlords. Rashid Staggy of the Hard Livings gang was down in 2019. Ernie Lastig Solomon, leader of the Terrible Josters, was in late 2020. One by one, the old guard of Cape Town's underworld was being wiped out. And with every king that fell, new challengers rose from the ashes. Within the 27's gang, Stevens set ancient rituals into motion. There would be a formal mourning period, a brief silence in the chaos. But beneath the surface, power struggles had already begun. Stevens had modernized the 27S, turning them from street enforcers into a disciplined assassination network. Now, his had left the gang with a question. Would they continue his vision or revert to the old ways? It took 3 years for the truth to unravel. In June 2024, police arrested 3 men, Jonathan Clout, Abraham Wilson, and Shaquille Pelston, for Stevens'. But they weren't the masterminds. That title belonged to Ralph Stanfield, an alleged leader of the rival 28's gang. It was he who had orchestrated the hit, ensuring the king of assassins was wiped off the board. Stevens' legacy remained a contradiction. In life, he had turned into a business. In death, he had become proof of the one rule no gangster could escape. No matter how powerful you are, there's always someone willing to pull the trigger. And on that warm February evening in Krypfenstein, someone did.